Every time I've been promoted in my tech sales career, I've honestly been caught off guard by how different each position can be. And it's not to say that it's totally different or some sort of rocket science, but today I want to lay out to you whether you're trying to break into tech sales or you're already in a tech sales career trying to promote from SDR to AE, or maybe even account executive to a higher level account executive like enterprise, what it really takes and the things you should consider when ultimately trying to put yourself in a position to promote. Because obviously things like quota attainment definitely help and are a large factor being considered into it. But I myself, honestly, if I didn't have great mentors around me, there were some interviews I had where I was going from SMB AE to mid-market AE that I honestly would have made myself look like a fool because I was totally focused on the wrong things. And again, the purpose of today's video is not just to give you an idea of some of the differences, but also if I was in those exact positions myself, in addition to hitting my quota, the types of things I would do, the types of activities that I would seek out, and the way that I would present my experience in a meaningful way when I'm ultimately interviewing for that next promotion. And again, if you haven't heard, as soon as this channel hits 10,000 subscribers in 2024, I'm gonna turn off ads for the rest of the entire year. So if you're looking for more sales advice from this channel without ads for all of 2024, we'd appreciate it if you subscribe. But let's jump in and paint a picture of some of the biggest differences. And I've made a ton of content about breaking into tech sales as an SDR, and I think this is gonna apply if you're in that situation. But let's start out let's say you're an SDR, right? And you're trying to promote to AE. I think in my mind, that is the biggest shift you will ever have in your career in terms of the types of activities, because you get very close to closing a deal if you're an SDR. You're around those discovery calls. You see a couple deals that, came as an inbound request. All the rep had to do was take 2 or 3 phone calls and close the deal. And yeah, there's certainly cases like that. However, I really think it's a bit of a mindset shift when you start going from a monthly cadence where you have to deliver 10 opportunities a month or 20 opportunities a month. When you shift to actually having a quota you have to hit, it just changes a bit of the dynamic and your timeline in a strange way actually extends. So whereas the SDR, you absolutely benefit from go, go, go all the time. I think if you really pour yourself into it for 6 months to a year, you can learn so much in that time frame and set yourself up. And I see so many reps that aren't willing to do that. However, when it comes time to actually promote, I think one of the biggest mistakes I almost made is I was so focused on, look at all of my activity. Look at this time I called a CTO and got a meeting. Look at how much better my emails performed than the average rep on the floor. And again, those are decent things that help. But really when you're thinking about that shift from SDR to AE, it can be intimidating if you don't have closing experience and you're trying to communicate that in an interview. And what I would say is you don't fundamentally have to have closing experience to do that, but ask yourself, how is an account executive organizing their territory? Forget the tactics about closing. You can learn those, you can prove those. There's a lot of resources online about how to drive discovery calls, right? But what I am really impressed by as a potential person looking at an SDR is how well organized they are in their territory. And I'm not talking about they have the best notes, they always, set up the meeting. I mean, that helps. Don't get me wrong. But are they thinking through their accounts strategically? And this is what I was really coached on by some of my mentors when going to AE, is really presenting not only the product well, but also how I organize my territory, right? If I couldn't articulate why I got an opportunity in one account and why it was so much better than another account, it doesn't necessarily show them that I'm gonna use my time effectively as an account executive. Because there's so many times, and honestly, you're gonna have to learn trial by fire, but as an account executive, especially early on, I wasted so much time with any deal that was in my pipeline because I wanted to close everything, and in reality, I should have spent more time qualifying out. And again, you may be an SDR that doesn't have that experience going into an account executive interview, but I will say, again, if you can talk through how you strategically organized your territory, if you can talk through why you prioritize certain accounts, and you can also maybe talk through some of the biggest opportunities that you landed, and even though you didn't close them, if you follow up with the AE and you follow that deal, you can speak to why that was such an effective deal. Those are the things that are gonna give me a lot of confidence that you're thinking like an account executive. That combined with the fact that hopefully you're performing well, you've hit and or exceeded your quota as an SDR, I have no doubt you'll be able to figure out how to lead a discovery call, how to kind of work into accounts, all of these different things. That will come with time. But again, if you're already ahead of the ball and organized and thinking about prioritizing the best accounts, you're really in a great headspace and give me a lot of confidence that you're gonna be a solid account executive. And one last thing I'd say on that note before we look at the account executive role specifically is I did recently make a video talking about how I organize my territory as an SDR. I'm gonna link that in the description, and also it's at the end of this video as the next suggested video. But here again is where I admittedly got overconfident. When I promoted from SDR to account executive in 3.5 months, I was really excited. It was great to have. And at the same time, I got into this account executive role, which again was the right decision, but very quickly things changed because it didn't benefit me to run through a wall every day. It didn't benefit me to hit the phone 50 times a day, send 200 emails a day. And prospecting helps, creating pipeline helps. But over the course of my time as an account executive, again, I have no doubt if you're a high-performing SDR, you can sell at the small business or SMBAE level, which is typically the first tier of account executives. And again, if you're not familiar, once you're an SMB account executive, there's mid-market or corporate beyond that, and then usually there's an enterprise tier and even strategic. And that just refers to covering bigger and bigger accounts. When I was trying to go from SMB account executive to mid-market, I think, got overconfident in my ability to close any account because I took for granted, and this, if you're watching and you're an account executive or you're an SDR about to promote in that position, if there's one thing you remember from this video, if you are an SMB AE right now and you want to promote to bigger accounts, one of the biggest mistakes that I see that I personally did and I took for granted is when you're selling to smaller accounts, you actually take for granted how much direct access you have to leadership. And sure, maybe on the first call, the CTO of a 300-person company is not jumping on the phone, but it's pretty easy to figure out the org structure, and it's pretty easy to figure out who you need to speak to close the deal. The reason I bring this up is because, again, I crushed it as an SMBAE. It was really great for me having a technical background. I could drive a lot of deals myself rather quickly because smaller companies tend to move faster. They're more willing to take chances on newer startups because they'll get white glove service, all of these different things. And I knocked it out of the park. But again, when it came time for me to promote to a higher level account executive position, when I was going into that interview, all I was talking about is how I led effective discovery. All I was talking about is how I discovered a major pain point at this small company and ultimately they signed within 3 calls. Because to me, that sounds great. That's a great story when I'm looking at all these enterprise reps that have 9 to 12 month deal cycles. And I get that it takes longer, but I thought coming to the table, like, look how fast I closed everything. Look how fast I was able to get to the CTO, all of these different things. And that's a great skill set. Don't get me wrong. There are some great stories to communicate there. But if that's all you have, and you can't talk about how you strategically got in front of executives, that's where I see so many people miss when they're trying to communicate their skill set and go to a mid-market account executive or enterprise account executive tier. Because the second you go from selling to a 250 to even maybe a 500-person company, there's probably 3 to 4 levels of people from the first person you talk to up to the C level or the VP that has budget to buy. But when you're going to companies that have 2,500, 3,000, 10,000 people, that's where it gets really different. And oftentimes, you're not necessarily going to win by just going through one predictable path of engineer, engineering manager, VP of engineering, CTO. There's many times when you get to these bigger companies that, yes, maybe especially at these mid-size, a lot of times the CTO will still ultimately pay for whatever software and they'll want to be involved in that evaluation, but actually getting to them is incredibly difficult. And if you get single-threaded, and again, coming back to the biggest mistake I see early account executives in their career make, is they talk about how they built a champion. That champion went up to the CTO and sold the product. And sure, that's pretty easy, relatively speaking, at a small company, and it still takes skill. But when you get to these mid-market, when you get to these enterprise companies, you've got to get really creative about how you get in front of executives. And sure, you still need to build a champion, but there may be cases where you need that champion not just to sell up, but also to get 2 other adjacent teams bought into what you're doing. Because even if it solves a problem for this person, it's still not big enough of a problem for the entire company that they're willing to invest time and money into it. And same thing, you could actually get overly comfortable because you get 2 other teams involved in this POC, but if you don't have visibility at the executive level, if you can't get creative to get in front of that executive and you're relying solely on one person to get you there, it is so difficult at a big organization. It takes weeks, if not months, for someone like that to even get on their calendar. And if you're not getting strategic and creative about how to do that, you're going to get killed when you go to these mid-market and enterprise levels. So that's what I'd say. If you're an early stage account executive trying to promote to mid-market or enterprise right now, you really need to put emphasis on the creative ways you got in front of executives. And don't get me wrong, all the things you do to build your pipeline, all the ways that you led effective discovery, all the things and ins and outs that you know about a deal that you led end to end, those are great. But what you really want to highlight is how you navigated through an organization. And in some cases, if you just went up through a single channel, that's fine. But what I'd really love to see you do is get creative, or maybe talk about a time where you brought in your VP of sales to talk to the CTO of this company, or that time where your champion wouldn't take you in front of the CTO, so you ultimately decided to write a summary, cold email, cold call them, wrote them an executive brief stating the problem that you were solving, and that's what ultimately got you a meeting. Those are the types of ways that you need to think, in addition to talking about your own experience, that really show me you're thinking at a level that is going to set you up for success at these mid-market and at these enterprise levels, where it's incredibly difficult to get to executives in the first place. And especially as you're going from mid-market to enterprise, it's really difficult at the enterprise level in some cases to even get in front of executives at all. There are times, certainly with like multi-million-dollar proposals, that's going to go all the way up to the C-suite. But there's times where you get to these very large organizations, and 2 or 3 levels below the C-suite, that individual is ultimately the buyer that has the budget and has full autonomy to make that decision. And sometimes getting that information out of the team is very difficult. When you get to these enterprise companies, these engineers are talking to 10 different vendors that they're already active customers of, or they're currently evaluating. And they're very reluctant, unless they really believe in your product, to take you directly to the executives. And it doesn't mean that you just have to find that one person and sell them and get them on your side. That helps. But in many cases, there are times where you may have to actively turn away prospects and ask them who the right person to talk to is. And or you may just have to find another way to get in front of other people at that company altogether and really be willing to walk away from a prospect that's not going to take you anywhere. That is one of the biggest challenges, I'd say, from mid-market to enterprise. Again, you go from SMB to mid-market AE, and you're starting to understand how to get in front of executives. You're starting to really consistently make strong, compelling business cases as to why your solution is a good fit. When you go from mid-market to enterprise, doing that again is even harder, because you may not be going to the CTO. You may now have 10 teams that ultimately would have a vested interest in your software. You're dealing with procurement cycles that take 6 months. You've got to find out, if it's not the CTO, which VP of engineering or global VP of engineering is ultimately going to sign this. You've got to find out in procurement, who is the procurement person that's going to take you to the promised land here? Are they going through a partner? Who is their preferred partner? What does that partner require of you in terms of security reviews, in terms of pricing, in terms of all of these different things? And again, restating, if you're in this situation, right? I do think the biggest shift obviously is SDR to AE, in the sense that just closing is a bit of a different dynamic. You have to think more in quarters instead of months, at least in my own experience. But as you get to AE and you go from SMB to mid-market to enterprise, the changes in terms of maybe your day-to-day workflow aren't necessarily as drastic as SDR to AE, but they are way more impactful. And at the SMB level, again, it takes a lot of skill, and those skills very much help you when you go to mid-market AE. But oftentimes I see so many people take for granted selling to small companies, how easy it is to get in front of executives, how easy it is to have someone take you 2 to 3 levels above, how easy it is for a small company to move quickly when making a buying decision. And that's where I see SMB AEs that are trying to promote to mid-market not really think about how to present their experience. Because when you're going to mid-market AE, all of the things I just mentioned are great. All of those stories about the deals you closed, but how did you get in front of executives? What were times that not just you, but maybe you brought in a C-level from your company or a VP from your company to talk to an executive? And those are the things that start to get me more confident in your ability to work in that mid-market segment. Then going from mid-market to enterprise, now a great way to talk about all the skills that you learn here, certainly getting in front of executives, making strong and compelling business cases, getting buy-in from multiple teams, those are great. But also, I maybe even want to hear about times where you thought you had a champion and they weren't, and you were able to pivot and still close the deal. Or maybe times where you thought you had identified the economic buyer or the person that was ultimately going to sign off and had budget, and maybe you realized it wasn't the CTO and it was actually the VP of engineering, and that changed your strategy, that changed your pitch. I also, especially as we're going to the enterprise, partnership plays come into play all the time. So for instance, if you've ever co-sold a deal with a partner like an SHI of the world, maybe you sold a cloud tool on the AWS or Google Cloud Marketplace, these are also great stories to talk about how you collaborated with third-party vendors to ultimately close a deal and incentivize it and make that business case even more compelling. Because as you get to the enterprise, again, this is a separate video in of itself, but there's so many factors like selling through partners, finding the economic buyer, finding a real champion, getting numerous teams involved and invested into your software, getting other teams to change their roadmap entirely for half of a year to incorporate your product or to prioritize your product over different things. There's just so many things on the enterprise side. I'm not expecting you as a mid-market account executive to have a story for every single one of those. But if you think back to some of the things I just mentioned, if you have stories around how you got even more creative to sell deals, things you uncovered, like as an example, your champion wasn't actually your champion, the CTO wasn't the actual buyer, how you leveraged a partner to close a deal even faster, those are really great stories that parlay into the enterprise level. So again, if you're breaking in, I've got a lot of videos about how to break in, but also if you're an SDR trying to promote to AE, I really hope this paints the picture and really creates an idea of the types of things you should look for, the types of accounts you should go after, and the types of activities you should be doing that really help you not only perform, but also in your interview when you're communicating up the chain. And also, if you're an active SDR right now trying to promote to account executive, we did recently launch our SDR Accelerator. There's more information in the description. And thanks again for your time. We'll see you in our next video. Appreciate it.